This morning, I'm feeling into my dreams from last night, and as can happen commonly for me, but has been happening less, is the bleed over of uncomfortable feelings from a dream. And this morning, I'm taking that sign of bleed over of anger and sadness of what happened in that dream world, which was fantasy, was just a story, but how those feelings are real, how those feelings represent similar situations I've had in my past, and perhaps these feelings are presenting again to show me they have been unresolved, that they have not been met with full awareness or with all of my love. And so I sat and journaled with these feelings this morning. And to start, it was quite difficult because although I recognized that these feelings came from my separate self, that we might also call the ego, that I didn't want to make it wrong. I didn't want to just throw everything out and say, oh, the ego's sense of separate self was injured, and so therefore those feelings are not important, because that feels wrong, that feels unloving. And the ego, we can't just eradicate it in a way that would, erase all of these feelings. This experience here for us in this 3D world on Earth, we do have egos and we do have personalities, and there, as far as I know, there's no way to get rid of it. And in fact, we cannot live in a non-dual state, because in that state, there's no desire to do anything. And the human body does need food and shelter, does need movement for the muscles to, and the circulation to function. So we do need to be engaged in the world. And that means engaging with others who also have an ego. So our egos function not just for engaging with others, but for creating desire and then motion in our lives. And in the non-dual state, everything is love, everything is equal, and there's no need to even move. So although it's blissful to be there and to reach that remembrance every once in a while, or perhaps many times a day, we cannot live there, at least in my understanding. And the yogis that live in the mountains, the mystical fathers and wise women that live in their secluded places, they can reach these states for long periods of time, and yet they also must come back to the separate self to care for the body. And so for us mere mortals who don't live on mountains, we spend much more time in our separate selves. But I'll also argue that that separate self is part of the fractal nature of this reality. And certainly when we get caught in the edges of that fractal where we feel so separate and we forget our connectedness to everything else, we turn around and we don't see our own tail connecting us back to the oneness. it becomes quite isolating, quite lonely. And our feelings that arise as we try to protect this separate self, often anger or sadness, when things don't go as that separate self believes they should, they can be quite overwhelming. So living in the separate self is not the ideal either. But there's a zone between the two where we can both engage the separate self and our non-dual self in the appropriate moments. And my teacher calls this the zone of participation. It's a zone where we actively use both areas and blend them. And I believe that zone is only in the present moment. The present moment is not sufficient, but that is where this zone of participation occurs. It's much more complicated than it appears on the surface of it. And I'm still learning as I'm practicing and meditating with subtle energy mechanics. But I'll also say that that zone of participation, that present moment where we both are separate me and connected to the we, that is where the richness, the tapestry of life, as we know it as humans on this planet, is really woven. Where we are active participants in creating moments of unconditional love, of full connectedness, while still appreciating the richness of emotions that can come from our separate me. To me, this is the best of both worlds. That represents perhaps the gift of this reality and the reason that we are here. For if our reason is just to ascend, to go to heaven, to reconnect with God or Source or however you feel it, then why even come here? If it is just to learn, then why even give us a sense of we, a sense of connectedness? Just put us through the challenges of life in a separate me body, separate me consciousness. No, I truly believe that there is, in the present moment, in the participatory learning and connection between me and we, which can only happen in relation. And we can relate to plants and earth and water, animals. But the true richness is when we relate to other humans. And yes, that is where the me experiences the most deep emotional turmoil. But again, that tapestry is rich with information. And when we look at that tapestry with the participation of our we consciousness and bring in that love from the we consciousness, we begin to see the beauty. We begin to see the reasoning. We begin to understand why and how it's all connected to our own learning and purpose here. At least That's what it did for me today. So I hope this somehow sparks something for you. Perhaps a glimmer of a remembrance of a time where you also were in the zone of participation, where you also felt connected to the me and the we. And I wish you a very blessed day.